Soil is the staple for indoor plants and has been in my home for many years now, but what if I told you there is an alternative way to grow plants that is less messy, easier to deal with, and potentially better for your plants? You might be under the assumption that plants have to grow in soil. I certainly was until recently. That's how they live when growing in Mother Nature after all, right? But the truth is, pretty much all plants can adapt to grow in soilless mixes like LECA, pond, perlite, or even just plain old water. And in lots of cases, they absolutely love it. I'll explain why, what these soilless mixes are, how to use them, and also some things you need to look out for before you make the switch. So let's get into it. First, a little bit of housekeeping because soil can be a pretty confusing term. For the sake of this video, when I refer to soil, I'm talking about the brown, crumbly stuff that is found in the pots of plants in mine and your home. And it comes in many different forms. Compost, peat, cocoa coir, it all basically serves the same function and acts in a similar way. Over time, it biodegrades and it absorbs moisture and nutrients that the plants can then use to grow on to be their best selves. The soilless mixes I'll be referring to in this video though are pond, which is basically a mixture of pumice, lava rock and zeolite, and LECA, which are essentially little balls of hardened clay, and then perlite, which is the white, lightweight, expanded rock, typically mixed into houseplant soil to make it lighter, and they all work with plants in a very different way. This is because they are inorganic and don't decompose over time like peat or compost. This makes them fairly low maintenance, although there are a few things to watch out for, as I'll explain later, as well as super long lasting. So this is how it works, and thankfully it's dead simple. Let's take this Alocasia Frydek as an example. This little guy has been living in pond for about a year now, and really there's not much to it. Instead of soil, he's got bits of rock around his private parts and he's perfectly happy. Now the big difference between him and his friends is how he keeps hydrated and eats his meals. You see, we normally wet the soil of our plants with nutrient-rich water and they drink it up through their roots as and when they need it. But this won't really work with pond because it's not absorbent. Water pond over the sink and the plant will be banging on your door begging for more in a day or two. So instead, we have to keep a reservoir of water in the cache pot to keep the rots hydrated at all times. But won't this kill the plant through overwatering, Mr. Sheffield? No, and here's the beauty of it. Plant death from overwatering occurs not because of the water, but because of the lack of oxygen. Soggy soil suffocates roots and they die off, leading to plant drama. A pond mix keeps air around the roots and they're happy as Larry. There's no murky, soggy soil to deal with. The basic idea is to keep your plant in a plastic pot like you normally would, and then keep a cache pot topped up with water so the pond doesn't dry out. Simples. When everything is working as it should, then you should start to see some roots starting to grow out of the pot into the water just like this. And when this happens, don't panic. This is all part of the plan and the roots will be fine. If they start to turn black or mushy, then you may well be having problems, but that shouldn't really happen. So why would we bother making this switch? Why is this so much better than soil? First of all, I'm not knocking soil. I'm a lover, not a hater after all. I've still got the majority of my plants in soil, but there is a time and a place for pond or LECA. Some plants just seem to respond better living in a soilless mix. They tend to be the fussy ones. You know, the ones you wouldn't take home to meet your mum and dad like Alocasia or Califea. The main reason for this is the root health benefits soilless mixes provide. Because the plant is essentially living in a pot of rocks, there's tons of air around the roots with very little compaction over time compared to soil. I'm sure you've come across this problem with soil before. It's been a while since you repotted your plant, so you get it out of the pot, which can be an ordeal in itself, and when you try to loosen the roots a little to make way for the new pot, it's mission impossible. That's because the soil has compacted over time, something that just doesn't happen as much with pond or LECA. I've had this monstera in this rather giant pot of LECA, and I reckon I can easily pull him out to check out his private parts. There you go, that just wouldn't be possible with soil. This lack of compaction would benefit any plant, but it's particularly great for plants with sensitive roots like Alocasia. It's also great for plants that need consistent moisture levels like Mr. Spider Plant here and Mrs. Califea. Because your only job is to make sure the reservoir water is topped up, it becomes much easier to keep the mix consistently moist, something that calafeas love, the needy souls. If you're a forgetful chum like me, then stopping your calafea from drying out can become a real battle. It's why we often see those infamous crispy edges on the leaves. Hate that. So if your beloved calafeas become a constant chore of cutting out dying leaves, Soilless mixes could be the way to go. By the way, crispy brown leaves is something that is listed in my plant troubleshooting handbook that you can nab for free with the link in the description. It'll get you out of a jam when something ugly starts happening with your plants and you don't know why. Check it out. So those are the benefits to the plant, but what about the benefits to us? I mean, we want an easier life too, right? Well, there are a few that I love. If you're a long time and suffering subscriber to the channel, you'll have seen me moan about this epidemic that rages in my house for far too long. And going soilless could be the answer to all my problems. And yours if you suffer a similar fate to me. Yes, we're talking fungus gnats. Those pesky little gits that fly across your face when you're watching the latest episode of Gardener's World. These little buggers love nothing more than rolling around and procreating by the thousand in soil, munching on fungus and sometimes the roots of your plant, and generally causing a nuisance in your home. Well, we don't have this problem with pon or LECA. It's hard to get down and dirty on a bed of rocks, isn't it? Another tick in the benefits column is just how easy it is to repot your plant with this stuff. Just yesterday, I repotted this alocasia fried egg into this larger pot, and it was a breeze. It's actually when I got the idea for this video. I'll try to recreate that scene for you, but it really was as simple as lifting this little guy out of his pot, popping him into his new home, and then piling on the rocks around him. No root untangling, no mess, it was all done in a couple of minutes. I also didn't have to throw anything out or worry about refreshing the mix. Pon and LECA can easily be reused without any worry about compaction or pest eggs lingering in the soil. Now, there are a few things you need to be aware of when using a soilless mix to ensure success that I'll go over in a bit. But first, let me show you the best way to transition a plant like this from soil to soilless. So I've got this anthurium here that is a gorgeous plant, but I seem to be struggling with it for some reason. There's a big old yellow leaf and that happens quite regularly. It keeps losing its leaves. It produces one leaf and another leaf goes by the wayside. So nothing seems to be working for this plant really, so I'm going to try putting it into LECA semi-hydro. So the first thing we need to do is to get it out of its pot. Whoops, I think I just snapped that yellowing leaf off. There you go. Good job it was that one and not a healthy one. So this was fairly recently repotted, so looks like most of the soil has fallen off quite easily, and maybe it was a bit of too big a pot for the plant. Maybe that's why it's been struggling a little bit. But anyway, the idea is to get as much of the soil off the roots as possible, because you want a nice clean root system when you put it into your semi-hydro substrate like pon or LECA. But you don't need to be completely spick and span. Just get rid of the bigger bits. And now that we've got most of it off with our fingers, we can go into the water. So I've got a sink filled with water here, tepid water, so you can just go in and give the roots a bit of a rinse. Okay, so that is them all washed off. Like I say, it doesn't need to be sparkling clean or anything, just get the main bits off. I seem to have done a good job there, getting all the bits of soil off. So they're looking nice and healthy, so that's what you want to see. To be honest, I do prefer to use pon rather than LECA, but I've run out of pon, so LECA will have to do. So I've got some LECA balls here, and I've given them a rinse outside in the garden. I've not done it in the sink, because I don't want all the soot from the dirty clay balls, because when it's in a bag, it's very dirty. And if you wash it through in the sink, you're just going to clog up your sinks, I think. So I did it outside. Relatively clean balls, don't need to be spick and span again, like I always say. So it's just dead easy to repot now. Just line up your plant in the pot like so, and then simply add your LECA in. And there she is, as easy as that. Took me seconds. Rather than if I was doing it with soil, it would take me a hell of a long time, wouldn't it? So that is all ready to go. So you can go into this decorative pot now. And then the last thing I need to do is just fill the cash pot with a reservoir of water so that the LECA remains nice and moist for the roots. So, what are the things that can trip you up when you go soilless? I've been experimenting for over a year now, and there are a few things that I've noticed and that have caught me out. The first is nutrients. Unfortunately, we can't just use regular houseplant fertiliser when we're using PON or LECA, but that is fine because there are fertilisers on the market specifically designed for hydroponics. There's a whole load of boring science on why this is, but basically, regular indoor plant fertiliser is designed for use with soil which already supplies some nutrients naturally. So these often lack certain micronutrients, assuming soil will supply them naturally. In semi-hydro, plants rely on the nutrient solution we provide since there's no soil to provide the additional nutrients, so it's often full spectrum. There's also stuff to do with electrical conductivity and pH, but the crux of it is this: just get some fertiliser suitable for the job. You'll also need to make sure the water you add is always laced with feed, since the plant can't get any nutrients from anywhere else. While it's generally easier to keep the reservoir topped up, you can get into a spot of bother if you forget about it for a couple of weeks and let it dry out. PON or LECA will dry out quicker than a t-shirt hanging out in the sun, and your plant will start to suffer. It's much quicker than with soil. I've got these little monsteras growing in LECA and perlite, and because the pots are quite small, they dry out quite quickly, which I think is part of the reason why they aren't growing as fast as I'd like. It's also important to do the fairly tedious job of flushing out the mix under a running tap to keep the pond relatively clean and stop the build-up of excess salts coming from the fertiliser you're providing. This can actually cause a problem called nutrient lockout, where the plant's roots can't absorb the nutrients we provide because of chemical imbalances. So it's a tedious but necessary evil, I'm afraid. I mentioned perlite as a soilless option, and to be honest, this is one of my least favourites. I've got some plants living in it, and it just tends to turn to mush when sat in a reservoir of water. The pieces of rock are too small, I think. Plus, when perlite is wet and exposed to light, there's a tendency to grow algae, which is annoying. And then there are more practical things, like these bleeding things can be damn heavy. The more your plant size is up, the more rocks you'll be adding, and the more your back is liable to break. It's not quite as bad as that, but you do get my drift. So the question is, do you even need PON or LECA? Well, no. The main function of these materials is to simply keep your plant in a pot. They're just for aesthetics, really. Everything the plant needs to thrive is in the water and fertiliser you're providing, so it stands to reason our plant will do just fine only in water. You will probably have problems with algae, especially if you keep it in a clear vase, but it will happily grow just fine. I often propagate plants in little jars of water, and the truth is there isn't really a need to move them into soil or pond. Add some fertiliser to the water and they'll be as happy as pigs in mud. So will I be transitioning all my plants to semi-hydro? Well, for the moment, no, not all of them. I like how easy it is to use and all the benefits to the plant I've explained, but the thought of having to flush out all my plants on a semi-regular basis gives me the shivers. Can't really be done with over 200 plants. So I'll be using it where needed on fussy plants like alocasia and sticking to my cocoa core base mix from Cybertanica. I definitely would not be using compost or garden soil. This would be a disaster for so many reasons, all of which I explain in the video here, so go check it out.